Welcome to the second of a two-part series exploring Deloitte's Tracking the Trends 2024. In episode 1, we gave an overview of the Trends Report and then covered the themes of purpose, net zero, agility, and value. If you haven't yet listened to that episode, we strongly recommend you do so before diving into this one. Our host for the series is Sthembiso Phakathi, Director in the Human Capital Practice at Deloitte Consulting. This episode begins with the topic of AI and skills development. Joining Sthembiso is Lee Venkathesamy, a director in Deloitte Consulting leading workforce development. From the UK, Andreas Zachariou, a director in consulting focusing on mining. And kicking off the conversation with a viewpoint on the potential for AI in the sector, Omeshni Naidu, director at Deloitte Consulting leading the CIO program for Africa.
I guess the question always, is it just hype or is it something that we really need to start taking the industry and moving it forward on? And I think what we're starting to see already, though, is that across many of the mining clients, that Gen AI is being used. So it's something that's genuinely being talked and actioned upon.
Have you seen some of our clients already starting to embrace Gen AI, and what kind of instances or kind of areas within the sector that it is being used?
So I think when we talk Gen AI from a standard consumer perspective, we've seen it evolve. What we're seeing in the mining industry, that evolution though is taking place from seeing mining companies consider optimization of how they run their processes as the starting point of the usage of Gen AI. But from there, what we're starting to see is a whole lot of new use cases. So being used by the mining clients in terms of sustainability. Yeah. So taking these large scales of data that is out there and now practically seeing how they can use Gen AI tools to unpack in terms of sustainability agenda and ways that they can now take this data and sustainably use it in their environment.
What about the scale that it's taking people's jobs? Other companies are seeing AI as a co-pilot or as a field assistant as opposed to displacing jobs. Are you seeing a lot of our mining clients embracing it as an augmentation to jobs or skills as opposed to just displacing skills?
I think there's always been the scare. It's been centuries, actually. Every time we hear the word automation, the scare comes up of, will skills change? Will jobs be lost?
Yeah.
It always is, like you said, it's about learning to adapt to that change. Jobs are not going to go away. They're just going to become different. Yeah. And so having agility in the environment is part of the way technology will help involve in environments. Yeah. The mining industry is not going to see a huge decrease in terms of jobs that are out there. What it will see, though, is the way those jobs are going to take place.
And the work, how work gets done.
Absolutely.
Great. Thanks so much. I want to turn to you, Andreas, around skills, and maybe talk to us a little bit about what's this doing about the skills of the future. If Gen AI is going to augment skills, how our skills are going to evolve, especially in the mining sector.
We see many clients now starting to think about what are those skills of the future. And especially in a sector like mining, where there is also an aging workforce, it becomes a bit more challenging to retrain and reskill the population around what's needed for the future. But that is where mining companies really need to focus on and really equip their people with the skills which are needed to be successful in the future. And actually reskilling people to have higher value jobs, actually, that help them be more effective and efficient in what they do. And we see that across the sector, not just in mining.
A lot of companies still hire against a job, not against a skill set. Yeah. Are you seeing a major shift in this industry?
I can't say that we've seen a major shift as of yet, but I see this as a true imperative going forward, especially with a younger generation. So if you look at the Gen Zs out there, they are less interested in having a secure job description, and they go into the morning, they do their 9 to 5, then they go home. No. They want experience. They want more breadth. And in order to get that breadth is less about what is written down in your job description, and it's much more about the skills that you bring to the workforce and to your day-to-day job to be able then to also try different things.
Lee, you're an expert in digital learning. In the mining sector specifically, are you seeing a big embrace of Gen AI to actually teach people or the workforce and how to embrace their work or their methods of working or ways of working?
So we expected a lot more mining companies to adopt Gen AI or technology quicker in terms of learning. What we are seeing is that when companies, or specifically mining companies, start small on a POC and do something small, improve the use case and see the broader value. I mean, we're talking of skills in generative AI. To Andrea's point earlier of this aging workforce, what we're finding when we adopt generative AI in building skills or augmenting workers, the loss of people leaving the industry is not that hard felt because that information, that knowledge retains within generative AI. So that experience that we would have been losing by someone 30 years in the industry, generative AI retains that and he then pushes that to the new person.
Talking about younger generation choosing experience as opposed to just job satisfaction. How can industry collaborate with universities to start training young people how to embrace and use Gen AI as augmentation to workforce as opposed to just a tool?
So we're seeing globally large industry mining getting really involved at an educational foundational level at universities to really input into what the curriculum needs to be for a mining degree or mining qualification. The more we have industry close to education and actually having a say in what needs to be trained, the better it is. Because the reality is that we are losing the speed to train people. And the skill shortage that we're seeing within mining now is, it's not necessarily a skill shortage, is that we are not in a very logical way telling people what needs to be learned to do a specific job or role. And when we do that, we're going to see much more of an impact.
I think there's also an element of fluency when it comes to new technologies and Gen AI or whatever that could be, which of course, university is a great opportunity to do that. But from my view, it needs to even start even earlier. Yeah. People need to start become familiar with these new technologies, how to use them, how to augment the work that they do, not to be afraid of them, because they are a reality, they're there. And almost thinking at secondary education at schools, what is the best way to start introducing people to those things and start making them intrinsically more fluent about those things? Because then that will ease their way into the workforce or into university when they actually start to use them.
Is it really easy to measure the impact on people performance due to Gen AI? How am I going to know that it's actually yielding the right value, especially at the level of human performance?
Well, from my perspective, it's no different than measuring anything when it comes to kind of technology-enabled aspiration. So it's all about setting kind of that KPI, the goal, the metric, whatever it's going to be that you want to measure. And it could be either like a hard fact, like a number, a percentage, or it could be back in the communities. Yeah. So it's all about finding the right ones to measure and not tech for tech's sake.
It's about knowing why you're doing this. So I think if you're very clear as an organization around the why you're doing it, then it's easier to measure.
One of the constants throughout human history has been uncertainty, and the world is arguably at a point in time where this uncertainty has been felt most acutely on a global scale. Our conversation now turns to this theme that is part of Tracking the Trends 2024, as is the theme of exploration with an acute need for investment in this area to nourish growth. Joining us are Deloitte team members Stuart Nupin, who looks after the Technical Mining Advisory Practice, Director in Mergers and Acquisitions Daniel Bordovic, and Jacek Guzik, the Strategic Sensing and Insight Team Lead.
Jacek, maybe let me start with you. We've covered earlier topics around Gen AI, shortage of skills, technology. All of this together, how much uncertainty is it really giving rise to, especially in the industry, mining industry?
So all what we talked about is happening amid the unprecedented global uncertainty. It seems that future ain't what it used to be. And that speaks directly to our second trend in 2024. From global geopolitics, Russian invasion on Ukraine, Israel-Hamas conflict, the Southeast Asia tensions, etc., to uncertainty about demand and supply of metals and minerals critical for green technologies, for the future of energy of the world, and the protectionist policies of countries who have those precious resources, to critical skills shortages in mining and aging of the mining workforce, to automation, digitalization, and opportunities and perhaps threats which generative AI can bring to the industry, that all make it for very difficult strategic decision making. And in order to navigate through that uncertainty, we propose to go back to tried and tested, to go to scenario modeling, scenario planning. Not the forecast, not the projecting of today, few years forward, but developing a set of divergent and challenging yet plausible scenarios which take a view on all the drivers, uncertainties, trends, global and regional, and creating versions of alternative futures which you can use in navigating the uncertainty and support the strategic decision making, but not stop there. Don't stop there. Use the scenarios for making your strategy more robust, making your strategy future-proof by immersing your strategy in each of the scenarios you have developed and looking for all those element strategies which hold across all the scenarios. There will be some which you need to tweak, modify. There will be some which you will need to rethink and perhaps abandon. With every uncertainty comes risk, which can be managed and should be managed, but also opportunity. There's no reason why mining industry shouldn't drive through uncertainty.
Talking about scenario planning versus predictive analysis, are you suggesting that we should do both, or should we just focus more on scenario planning moving forward, especially for the business executives in the sector?
I think we should do both, and we should use scenarios more than just stories. They should be data-rich narratives, which can also yield numerical and hard predictions rather than just stories around how future may unfold.
I want to turn to Stuart around this thing. We spoke about exploration at some point at the symposium and the role of technology around using drones as an example to cut down the amount of time it takes, but also the type of skills it requires. You want to touch on that?
I will touch on that, but I think if I could just start the exploration with where Jacek left off on uncertainty, because uncertainty is very important for exploration. Yeah. Exploration is difficult to fund and to sustain in an uncertain environment. Yeah. Mining is a long-term investment game, and so it's not an easy environment in which to explore, actually. Nonetheless, we do and have identified exploration as being one of the key trends that we will see playing out, and particularly on the African continent. There has been a trend of limited exploration worldwide, and again exacerbated on the African continent for grassroots exploration. And we think that will change as a result. And notwithstanding the uncertainty, we will see an increase in exploration as part of this phase of mining. So to come back to your question on technology then, yes, there certainly will be, and there are areas where technology can improve the speed with which we look for the deposits which support future mines. There are examples of AI being used and machine learning to look back at data which has been generated for years and years over time. Yeah. The geology hasn't changed, but what we have now is more powerful sets of tools, a greater ability to trawl through large amounts of information. And we're certainly seeing examples of shorter lead time towards deposit identification. I think what will be interesting to see is that there's a school of thought that the finding of deposits is not going to be that which holds up the availability of supply in the future, because we already have a good understanding of large amounts of where copper and cobalt and nickel and manganese are. The issue will probably be, can we fund, develop, put infrastructure so that what we've found actually turns into supply.
We're also talking about the geological infrastructure on the ground. And one of my clients is exploring nickel, copper in East Africa. Do you feel that within this industry, there's enough infrastructure to do exploration, especially in the Far East?
It's a good question. There's certainly large parts of the world where there hasn't been enough geological exploration undertaken, and hence our identification of the need to go back to grassroots. But it's on a case-by-case basis. It's difficult to generalize. There's certainly some areas of the world where it's been difficult to operate in the past, and we may see the emergence of certain new areas. But for the most part, I think we're looking at areas which have already largely been explored, but as a result of the difficulty in bringing projects to market, as a result of the constant uncertainty in commodity prices, we don't see that which we've already found actually coming to market.
Jacek, what's the role of climate policy around uncertainty? You mentioned geopolitical tensions and those kinds of things. What about climate policy? Are you thinking it's going to have an impact in creating certainty around this sector moving forward?
I think the impact of the climate policies is for everyone to be seen. ESG is the focus of all the mining companies right now. And I do believe that it's an opportunity as well for the mining industry to reinvent itself. It's the industry which obviously everyone is looking towards to provide all those minerals and metals which are critical to our green future. So mining is greening the world. I think there's a very great opportunity for the mining industry itself to green itself and change the perception.
The final two themes in the trend report are related to regulation and deal-making for future forecast growth. Daniel Bordovic remains in the conversation. He's joined by Yao Late, leader for the Financial Advisory Unit in Deloitte Ghana, and Zama Dlamini, a partner in Deloitte Africa within the Risk Advisory Division and an industry leader for energy, resources and industrials.
Let me start with you, Yao. Talking around the investment within this industry for deal making, what trends have you seen in your region around competitiveness of these deals? And what are the investors looking for particularly?
If you look at Africa continent in general, there are some statistics that are quite revealing. The continent has got a population that's about 20% of the world population. 30% of the world's mineral resources are based in Africa. But guess what? It is only 2% of the world's capital required for exploitation of the mineral that stays in Africa. 98% of the world's capital for mineral exploitation stays outside Africa. That means there's a cost for us to make deals in Africa rather than deals being made out of the continent and being brought here for exploitation. So what I've seen, investors are not doing this just for the sake of it. There's a reason why there's significant capital outside the continent. And some of the things that they have mentioned, or most of the investors that we've engaged, are the lack of clarity in our regulation. Our tax laws are not clear. We are inconsistent with our policies. So year on year, successive governments are changing policies year on year. And that gives a lot of concern to investors. Where there's uncertainty, no capital goes there. And then stability in policy, stability in government is also another key thing that investors are concerned about. The last point about return on investments. Investors are interested in areas where there's higher return on investment. And the reason why it costs a lot to invest in Africa is the fact that you invest in other things that you cannot quantify. And one key area is, let's say, areas where there's a lot of corruption. So that takes a lot of the capital away.
Zama, let me turn to you. Competitiveness of these deals, what have you seen with your clients, especially in the southern side of Africa? Are you seeing more clients or more companies moving into these deals for growth and to become more competitive and actually combining assets?
With the journey towards clean energy, towards green economy, mining houses are looking to diversify their portfolios. And especially those who are in the coal business, they are looking at different sets of minerals, of different assets. But everyone is doing it, so everyone is chasing the same assets. So everyone is also competing for the same capital, which makes it highly competitive. So it then becomes important for mining houses to distinguish themselves. Investors are looking for companies that can prove that the ROI is there. But that's just one part. The other critical one that investors are looking at is the ESG performance. Okay. So whilst one is seeing a spike in the M&A activity, but I think mining houses should look outside of the traditional investment boxes. Joint ventures are a possibility, the alliances, the partnerships. So I think because we're competing for the same assets, same capital, we need to think broadly and make sure that our houses are in order to attract the investors.
I'm glad you mentioned JVs, alliances, and partnerships. So why maybe those kinds of arrangements or business arrangements are not that attractive to the industry? Why are they not using those alliances or partnerships to maybe as a start to these kinds of big M&A transactions? Isn't that an option to start there?
I think it is, but I think it's also in the search of the type of a deal. I don't think that the M&A transactions and consolidations, it's going to take a dip anytime soon. But I think it's there because, again, I'm going to go back to this point of the competition of the same assets, the same capital. It's forcing the mining houses to think more broadly.
Then in M&A, how much capital injection or capital allocation is allocated for M&A, especially in this industry?
Absolutely massive amounts. In the last quarter of 2022, globally we saw about 288 transactions being done, jointly valued at about $90 billion. Companies are definitely rushing in to try and secure a piece of the pie around the critical minerals of the future, the minerals that are going to drive electrification, urbanization, and our whole move to net zero. The challenge that we're going to see continuing is that all of these companies are chasing exactly the same deals.
Same thing, yeah.
They're chasing the same deals when arguably the valuations are quite high. Specifically around what Stuart mentioned, there's a bit of uncertainty around what the demand profile is actually going to look like in the near term. Unless you've got an extremely patient shareholder, unless you've got a low cost of capital, and unless you've got a very big checkbook, you're going to have to start getting very clever about the type of deals that you make. Particularly in the African context, we know that the African continent holds a lot of these mineral wealth that we're going to need in years to come. The question is how to get to it. We know where it is, but what do you do with it once, it's in the ground? Doing deals in Africa is not simple. And the spoils are going to go to those people who are bold enough to say, let's go and get it, but at the same time, we recognize that we need to bring a host of players with us.
Yeah.
And those players are going to include people who can do the infrastructure construction, people who can operate very complex logistics systems, the miners themselves. And maybe to fund all of this, you're going to have to get clever around your financing and bring in alliance partners that could even extend to the end user. The bottom line around doing a deal in Africa, and we keep hearing this when we talk to various ministers and players in African government. The message is, if you can do a deal which is good for the African people, then it's going to be a good deal for you.
It's going to make sense, yeah. Do you think there's good appetite from financiers to finance these kinds of deals, especially in Africa, when we're saying we don't want to ship our products offshore, but also enrich the actual African continent? Do you believe that financiers actually play the part?
I think there's a broad desire from all of the players involved to do those type of deals and to find ways to finance them. The question is, who takes the lead? There are so many disparate parties that need to be brought together and that all need to operate in unison so that you can get something out of the ground, move it all the way to a port, beneficiate it before it leaves.
Before it leaves, yeah. They're looking for value and for the benefits. Obviously, they don't want to lose anything because they want the assets to remain in Africa, correct?
Definitely, and I think that's fair. And if you get a sense of the African zeitgeist, which is currently happening, I think that's now factual. 10 years ago, it was lip service.
Yeah.
I honestly believe now people really, really want to see that happen. And hopefully it will.
Yeah, I want to come back to this ROI risk. You mentioned corruption. We know corruption is cancerous in Africa, and we've seen this. How do we lobby business to work with government to just stop the cycle of corruption so that these deals are clean, they are done faster, and they are done like in a legitimate kind of way? Is there a role that Deloitte, together with business and other stakeholders, could do or work together to stop the cycle?
Yeah. I think we can look at about 1 or 2 countries who are scoring very high on what we call the Corruption Perception Index. One of those countries will be Rwanda. The reason why they are scoring remarkably well on the Corruption Perception Index is that they have reduced human interaction in the permitting and the regulation process. A lot of the things you do in these countries are done online. No human interaction. Namibia has done so well. Their processes are online. You can go through the application process, permitting process online. If you have to interact with somebody, that's when the temptation to engage in corruption.
You spoke earlier in your opening statement around our African resources remaining in Africa, creating beneficiation here, manufacturing here. In West Africa, are you doing much in that space to create opportunities for mining houses, to create spaces for manufacturing and beneficiation?
So I think the problem we have in the sector is the lack of technical resources or the expertise in the sector. We have aging infrastructure. Power is a crisis all over. We do not have the right infrastructure to support the development of the mining sector. I think there are a number of solutions that have been proposed. The first one, it's us training the resources. In Ghana, I'll give you an example. The government has introduced what we call the STEM, S-T-E-M. There are scholarships available for science, technical, engineering, and mathematics students. The art students are there, but the support from government goes to people who are in the STEM. So you get scholarship if you are studying something that is science, technical, engineering, vocational. That is a motivation.
To wrap up this episode, we asked Ian Sanders, the global mining and metals sector lead, for a final thought on Tracking the Trends 2024.
There's a lot of great conversation in and amongst it, and you can see the synergy amongst a couple of those trends. But what we're trying to do with the trends is to say that there's a complex world, there's uncertainty that exists, but there's great opportunity as well. And people are still at the heart and the centre of what mining and metals is. Taking a look at the trends, consider how are they relevant to me? What am I going to face into when I'm looking at my strategy as an example? How am I going to strategise around these different elements that are relevant to my organisation? Is what I would encourage boards and senior members, senior executives to do. Certainly, if you need any help with respect to information and further analysis on the trends, come to your Deloitte representative.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Deloitte Tracking the Trends 2024. If you'd like to see the report yourself, you can download it using the link in the show notes. And if you found this episode informative or interesting, please share it with your colleagues.